Yeah, it's wonderful to have you all here. And we're going to literally dive right in. And I'll make some introductions a little bit further into, I'll just say that I'm Rob. You all met Gaetan, I think, as you came in. We're the co-founders. We're going into our 22nd year, which is exciting. Okay. So in the 1940s, this was one of the most recognizable and popular and most loved paintings in America. You probably, I'm sure everyone here recognizes this piece. It's The Nighthawks by Edward Hopper, painted in 1942. And this, painted in 1948 by Andrew Wyeth, Christina's World, was also one of the most publicized, reproduced, talked about paintings in America. And in 1950, this was the most important painting in America. This is Autumn Rhythm by Jackson Pollock. I'm sure you all recognize Pollock's work, which is at the Met. And these three paintings here, Woman One by Willem de Kooning, Ellsworth Kelly called Cité from 1951, and Marc Rothko there on the far right, were three of the other artists and styles of art that were the most talked about and influential art of that period just after those Wyeth and Hopper paintings that we looked at. So you can imagine what a whiplash that was for people. To go from the paintings at the top to the paintings at the bottom. What is going on? This was so challenging for people to adjust to this new way of looking at art, of thinking and talking about art. And yet, it was incredibly popular. You know, abstract expressionism and the work of Jackson Pollock debuted roughly around the same time as rock and roll, which is really interesting. I hadn't put that together, but as I was looking at Pollock's work and thinking about the rebellious nature of the work, I was like, this is kind of like rock and roll. I wonder when rock and roll was developed. And sure enough, they're right alongside each other, happening just in that post-war period, right around 1950. So Pollock actually became an overnight star. I mean, we say overnight star. He'd been working as an artist for a couple of decades at that point and changing styles, but this is Life magazine. And within a year, his work was being used in fashion photo shoots for Vogue, for example. So I put that there just to show you how quickly this total change in art became part of the accepted vernacular of art in the US, even if people weren't quite sure how to interpret it, how they were feeling about it, what it was about. But America was at this very special moment in Western history. Oh, wait, sorry. That brings us to our title. How to look at American painting in the post-Pollock decades. And we're going to focus on painting, and we're going to focus on roughly 1950 to 1985. And we're going to do something different than the way I learned art history, which is that we're not going to focus as much on chronology and names and dates and making sure that you know the movement name that it was a part of. And that's all the kind of like who, what, when, where, but that doesn't really get to the why. And the why is really, I think, the most important part. That's where we get the learning. That's what makes us want to lean in and say, tell me more about this. I want to understand your work better. What is the why here? So we're going to be talking about the creative energies, the impulses, and the intent of artists during the 35-year period, rather than going through the chronology of like, well, first there was abstract expressionism, and there were these famous names, and you should know these three pieces that are at the Met, and then there was Hard Edge, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to talk about these ideas. And I think that will help us get closer to putting ourselves in a headspace where we can go out and really enjoy work and have a relationship to it and not just be able to walk around and categorize things. Oh, that's a Rothko. Oh, that's a Mitchell. I was telling our team here earlier that when I was in art history class in 1987 at Cal State Fullerton, our main study book was this spiral-bound, like postcard-size little book that had all of the pieces that we needed to know for the course in black and white. There was, none of the information was on the front. You turned it over because it was like a flashcard and you were learning. There was only one woman out of like the 350 images that were there, and it was Georgia O'Keeffe. And while it was really, I actually was like in heaven learning all of that, in reality, it only got me a little part of the way to having an experience of actually having a relationship and an experience with art that went beyond just being able to say things. What I thought I was about to say before I said, oh, there's a title, is this part here, which is that that we've got to remember where we're at in time. So we're talking about roughly 1950 forward that we're going to be speaking about. And this is an era that has seen, just prior to it, 2 world wars, 2 major wars that were world-altering. We had the Depression. I didn't even list that there. We had lots of artists and thinkers come to the United States, leaving Europe because of various oppression and fears that they had about what was happening in the 1930s in Europe. And so we had artists like Piet Mondrian, who were part of the avant-garde of art in Europe, bringing this to the US. So we were so lucky to be sort of like seated with all of this new thinking and learning that was coming from Europe and all of these teachers that would come here. It was the rise of America over Europe. We were the winners, so to speak, of the war, and we were the ones who were sort of like resetting the table of geography and of culture. And this was something that was really interesting to me, which is that the idea of existentialism, hard to explain, but the idea that the meaning of life follows our existence and that we create our own meaning in life, and that there isn't a divine that is bringing that to us, came to the United States really in the 40s, because that's when it was first translated from the French and German to English. So we had this idea of existentialism, being in charge of your own destiny. We had the rise of the myth of the American hero, rock and roll, the idea that these abstract expressionist artists like Pollock were just everyday Joes that had become American heroes, that wore jeans and flipped paint around and were macho and tons of bravura and mavericks. And this whole idea of being an individual and forging your own way, a very American idea. And the exportation, or I think maybe the better word is the exporting of freedom as an idea and American culture around the world. And part of that would be obviously film and music, but art, because now art has recentered itself, in terms of Western art, has recentered itself in more or less New York, and New York is the capital of the art world. It's no longer Paris. So as I was thinking about that very grandiose title that I came up with like 3 months ago, I was like, well, I know, we'll say like how to like look at art, in the post-Pollock decades. And it seemed like such a great hook to get people to come here, and it would wrap up all the artists we're gonna talk about. When it actually came down to working that out, I was like, this is gonna be really hard. And I spent a lot of time thinking, well, I could come from this angle. We could group things like this. We could do a chronology, but I'm not really a supporter of that. And it was really about a week ago when I kind of had all my material that had been just amassing inside of me, and all of my cards all around the house. And my husband Craig will tell you all of my stacks of books in 3 different rooms at minimum, that the idea of thinking about the why, the intent, the impulse, the energy of the artist rather than the movements came to me. So I started going through my art history books and being like, all right, what are these currents that I'm seeing that seem to be grouping different styles of work and artists together. I'm sure I'm not the first person to come up with this particular siloing of the concepts, but hopefully I am. And where I've put us is that we're going to look at work through the lens of disruption, the disruptors, the rebels, order, and alchemy. And I want to just pick up from that first set of images that I showed you of Edward Hopper and Nighthawks and Christina's World and say, like, the big thing that's happening and why this is so confusing for folks is that we're moving away from the world of picture making and storytelling. Yes, abstract art was already happening before that, but really the current and the avant-garde is really moving toward this idea of ideas and concepts and a creative energies that lead towards pure art. And when I first heard this term pure art, I felt like I really wanted to be able to identify it because it's so important to this. Artists no longer wanted to be indebted to the idea that they needed to strictly reproduce something, an object, a scene from the outside world in their work. They wanted to reassess and say, could we make something that would be pure art, which means that it doesn't rely on something from the outside, but that it relies simply on the materials and on the will and the creativity and the intuition of the artist, and that could be pure art. It's not tainted by the need to refer to these outside things and try to imitate them. Is that making sense? And when we say pure art, that implies this idea of purification, which means that something needs to change and happen in order to purify that and get on this track towards this goal of pure art. So we're going to talk about work in terms of disruption, which are the artists as rebels and explorers. An example of the piece here by Joseph DiStefano, one of our artists tonight. And order, the artist as builder and designer. And alchemy, the artist as a mystic and a transformer of the materials. And I want to say that it doesn't necessarily go in this order. We didn't have just the disruptors followed by those who sort of reassessed and put the order back together, and then we have the alchemists. They were kind of concurrent currents that were going on, but these were artists who were seeing these as three different ways of purifying art towards this ideal. Y'all with me? Okay. All right, so disruption. This is the artist as an anarchist, a rebel, an explorer. They have the freedom for a quest to begin again. And this is this idea of resetting after the war, after the loss of meaning, after the loss of feeling like the old order wasn't working anymore, after feeling like they had made it all the way to be able to do perfect realism in artwork. So what's next? And so the disruption begins with negation and saying, like, we're closing the door to that and we're starting something new. And it's a refusal to obey the inherited rules of beauty, proportion, and composition. And we can see this process here in Jackson Pollock's work. So this is very close together. This is 1946 through 1948. This piece called The Key, Shimmering Substance, and Number One from 1948. And you can see the process that he's going through of purifying and getting rid of any references to biomorphic shapes, to landscape. And then we get a little further, he's almost there, and then the breakthrough. And that breakthrough came with a lot of changes that we now know as kind of canon of what happened with Pollock, which is that he took the canvas off the wall and took it on the floor. He began to work with inexpensive materials that he could freely thin out and fling around the canvas, that he would use his whole body in the making of it, that he wouldn't necessarily start off with any idea of what he was going to make, but he would let his intuition as he was beginning to see the formation of it happen, this tangle, this weave, that it would be coming from that pure space, and that it was a record of the act of his body of making it. So it's kind of a precursor to performance art in some ways. There's some early films of his art being made, and you can see that the making of the piece and the way he was using his full body and not just his wrist or his elbow, but the full body, was as much about the making of art as any of the other techniques or materials that were in it. So he was looking to find some form of truth through taking this risk and playing in this immediacy of what he was doing. So we're going to look at other disruption. This is an artist named Linda Beglis, and this is a floor painting from 1970. Gaetan, I saw one of these in New York 15 years ago. So she took the idea a little bit further, disrupting this idea that a painting needed to be painted up on a wall. And she said, like, the painting stays on the floor. And so her compositions, when they travel, actually, and are exhibited on the floor just like this, and you walk around them. So that was her way of disrupting the position of the painting and the way that it's made and where it lives. And then we have de Kooning. Now, de Kooning stays in the world of figuration to a certain extent. The series called Woman, a very controversial series because lots of people interpreted it as a very nihilistic, negative interpretation of women. But so he stays in this world of figuration, but he is really tearing the figure apart and rebuilding it and tearing it apart. Many of these paintings took 2 or 3 years to make. And he's all about the contradictions. Is this beautiful? Is this menacing? Is this mother? Is this demon? And I looked back to the original. This was part of, I think it was the very first card in my little flip thing. It was the Venus of Willendorf at that time, but now we have the Venus of Hofels, which is the oldest work of art as a three-dimensional sculpture that we have from 38,000 years ago. I don't even know, he wouldn't have been aware of this particular one, but you can see how much a parity there is between this ancient idea of woman. And one of the things that de Kooning was interested in was the idea that a painting is never finished. And so he wanted his paintings to have this unresolved feeling. That is such a negation of what was expected before. You were meant to finish that painting completely before you presented it. So this is definitely a disruption of this idea that the painting lives in limbo. And artists were really working in series, and I think this is what's so important to see, is like it was a conversation they were having with themselves and with their public. Their work would often continue to explore these themes over decades, and it wasn't just a whim that we have an image that looked like this. This is a working out of this idea. This is Franz Klein, and he really started off by seeing that the strokes that he was making in sumi ink on this small composition with newsprint behind it had the potential for monumentality. And so he transferred and translated this idea of the mark making of the artist, the simple gesture of the artist, into these monumental paintings, literally blowing up those gestures into these large sizes. And so he's taking this idea that it can be as simple as recording the movement of the hand in the composition and bringing that up to a monumental size, and that this can make a feeling and a statement about the chaos of the city, the force of one's own will to create. And he also would work out this style over a long period of time. This is Robert Rauschenberg, probably one of the most challenging artists for me to decipher because he worked in so many different mediums. But this is one of his best-known pieces. It's called Monogram, and one of his other best-known pieces called Bed. Here the disruption is that he is dissolving the wall between real life and fine art. And he's saying that everything, all the detritus in the world, all the flotsam and jetsam, all the things that are discarded on the streets of the city, I see beauty in that. For me, walking down the street, he would think, is just an exploration of all these different shapes and colors and patinas and the way things age and combine and layer on top of each other. This piece took him 3 years to do. And what he also does is takes the painting off the wall to the floor. So it's almost like a collage and an abstract expressionist painting. Of course, we have this taxidermied goat on there. And he's blurring the line between sculpture and painting. So another disruption of these very clearly delineated forms of art. And then on the right, this is a piece called Bed. And in this case, he said, what's the difference between the covering on my bed and the sheets and a canvas? What could be a more intimate way for you to know about me than for me to make this painting using my bed? So these are really conceptual ideas. Whether it's beautiful or not, or engaging or not, is up to you. But these were so challenging to the way people thought about art. This is the disruption part of it. This is Jasper Johns, who was actually the person who shared that bed with him. One of the lesser talked about things. There were a lot of queer artists at this time. And he wanted to disrupt the habit of the way we see by calling attention to the basic building blocks of art, the formal elements. This is how art historians would put it. So we have a painting here called Device Circle where he's using primary colors. We have the yellow, red, and blue. The circle that's there has been etched out with this little tab or arm that has gone around. It's kept it in place. And then he stenciled in the words Device Circle on it. He's basically like turning the painting inside out. He's laying it bare and saying, a painting is made of primary colors that can be blended into many different colors if you like. It is etched into the surface by a tool, which I'm going to leave on the surface of the canvas. And it is titled, but I'm going to put that on the canvas itself. He's just turning it, all the guts of the painting are there on the surface of the painting. This is another Rauschenberg. This is exactly the sort of painting that people would be like, I'm sorry. Am I being tricked here? Like, this is not art. This is a charlatan who's pulling something over on me. And I would have thought that. But what I've learned is that he began to think about a white surface as being a surface that receives and reflects everything that passes by it. The shadow, the colors that bounce off of it, all of the ways in which the atmosphere affects the painting. So the painting is you essentially looking in a mirror of what the subtleties are that happen in the room. Another disruption. This is Julian Symczak, and this is optical art. So it's tricking our eye, disrupting by saying, is this really what I see? And Warhol. I actually really struggled where to put him in this sequence, but Warhol is tearing down the idea of low culture and high culture being separate. And he's tearing down the idea that things are singular. He's putting them in repetition and wearing down the meaning of them and creating new meaning through that. And he's also giving us a very familiar image that lies to us because it's Elvis as a cowboy, which he never was. He only played I only play a cowboy in paintings. And so he's really saying, like, fame and image is becoming a commodity, and that gets us to pop art, which is something we'll talk about a little bit more later. Lastly, Basquiat. Basquiat, who's using a door here, who's a graffiti artist, is saying that we're breaking down the wall between street art, the art of the, in many cases, less privileged in New York, who only had their cans of spray paint and the city as their canvas, that there is no difference between that and fine art. And so he is using that as the building block to then look into the world of his representation as a black man in New York and the commodification of his identity and using graffiti as a vernacular that would have been considered not an art vernacular prior to that. Okay, we're a third of the way through this first part. So after all that disruption, we have other artists. I shouldn't say after, because it's really somewhat concurrent. It's like choosing which lane you're going to go in. We had other artists that said, you know what, no, the way to rebuild art and get toward a pure art is to really think about this in an orderly, designerly, architecture-like fashion. So these are the builders and the designers of art. They're looking for clarity, for geometry, for repetition, discipline. They want to build sanctuaries of logic, serenity, and rhythm, which to us could look very simple because it demands a lot of attention from you to get something out of it. This is Joseph Albers. He would do this series of just showing the intersection between colors of the way they affect each other for 25 years. This is called Homage to the Square. This is one of like 300 pieces he did like this. So he's rebuilding by talking about the ways colors affect each other. This is one of our artists, not that we're featuring tonight, from the past, Bernard Zoisa, in a similar fashion. He's looking in this more fragmented way of putting together a pattern that plays with the idea of the way that we perceive color and design and shape. This is Frank Stella. This is a SF MoMA here. And he's really saying, like, look, his raison d'etre was like, look, there's no illusion here. This is a painting. This is a two-dimensional surface with stripes of paint on it. And I'm going to build a compelling composition out of just stripes of color onto this canvas. Basically, what you see is what you get. And you know what? Just looking at color can be a great what you get if you take the time to meditate with that. So there's no narrative, there's no metaphor. This is not meant to be interpreted. It is meant to just simply be seen. This is one of the pieces we have out in the hall. It's called Portuguese Walls by Barbara Lewis. So she is interpreting in this case how to break down the wall she saw in Portugal into just a series of geometric shapes and textures. This is an artist I kind of recently learned about in doing this. She was part of the Washington, D.C. School of Colorists, they were called, or the Color School, Anne Truitt. And she was taking this idea of the intersection of colors and actually saying that the painting can be something that stands in space, that you need to walk and move around it. So it's not lying on the floor, it's in an orderly composition, it's upright, and we interact with it walking around it. Hans Hofmann, one of those artists that came to the US because of the conflicts in Europe and was the primary teacher of modernism to East Coast artists. And it's so interesting to see, this is his composition Apples from 1934, and this is called Auxerre, which is somewhere in France, in 1960, 59 to 60. His approach was to say that colors are so powerful, they push and pull us. They push and pull our eyes. And so he was teaching his students through these simple geometric forms that color can either recede or it can surge toward you. So this is this idea of playing with that, and you can even play with it to a point where they're actually fighting for attention with you. Ellsworth Kelly, this is the room at SF MoMA. This would have been another one that I always had trouble with. Like, okay, so it's a singular color or it's two colors, it's on a shaped canvas, that is innovative. But in my process of doing this, I took more time to do things like this, which is actually to walk up to the canvas and let it envelop me and try to see what it is that Ellsworth Kelly wanted me to see, and there was a lot there. Those oranges / reds had so much energy and vibration, and I was really noticing the shadows that were there and the way that having just one receded and one in front created a differentiation between the color. So again, teaching us this building block, but it requires attention. This is an artist that is rarely talked about. He's a Native American artist, George Morrison, an Ojibwe artist. He's really looking at organic order. So less of this geometry and more of these soft shapes. You can imagine this coming more from the earth, and that there is an inherent kind of puzzling together of forms. If we look at the way that stratas are, for example, in the Earth's geology. And our own Richard Diebenkorn, one of our great Bay Area artists, was sort of saying like, okay, let's look at landscape in an orderly fashion. For him, he had served in the war and served flying in the war and observing. Now you got to remember, like most people had never flown in a plane in the 1940s. So flying in a plane and looking and seeing the way the United States is cut up into all of these orderly shapes of roads and fields, et cetera, left a huge impression on him, and he began to interpret the landscape in a way that wasn't this soft form, but instead had structure. But we still get this kind of loose, organic painterliness within those geometric forms. These are really large paintings, 7, 8, 9 feet tall. And one of our artists here, Marc Symczak, and I want to say, am I saying the last name right? Okay, great. Marc's work would also explore this idea of order. And here we see like this is a turtle and an armadillo. Turtle and armadillo, and there's some snake shapes in the others, and he's really looking at how all of the pieces and colors fit together. This is actually the way I see the world as an artist, which is that when I look at a cityscape, when I look at a landscape, when I look at a collection of objects, I'm really seeing not entirely or strictly, but I'm seeing shapes and color and line. And I kind of like to rebuild my own compositions based on that. And this is very illustrative of that idea of building this way. How are we doing on time?
You're at 33.
Okay. I saw you look at your watch, so I knew that you were. All right, this is MoMA, New York. I've just told you that there's a lot of attention required in the looking at painting from the Post-Pollock era of 1950 on. But heck, look at this room. I didn't even pick like the fullest room, but it just shows you how difficult it is for us as viewers and for institutions like museums to present art in a way that can really make the greatest connection and meaning for us, because it's like walking into a room with 40 songs playing at once.
Wow.
Which song are you going to pay attention to? It can be so thrilling to walk into that room, and it's just like all the things you want to see, and so exhausting. People in the museum world talk about museum fatigue. About an hour and 20 minutes into it, people start to get tired. That's why we've got cafes and bookstores and so on. But even people who are in the art world, 2 hours into it and you're getting tired because you've just listened to 75 songs and all these different messages and impulses and visuals have been flying at you. So we really don't have a great way of dealing with this. Obviously, not every artist can have a room for every one of their pieces. But when we get to this area of alchemy, it is so important that we make space, that we make time for a piece if we want to get anything out of it. It's like anything, it takes wherever we put our energy is where we're going to get some energy back. So if we want to put a little work into it, we're going to get so much more out of it than just walking by. So the alchemists are the artists that are the mystics and the transformers. They're looking for freedom through transcendence, and they believe that's still possible after the war and after all of the things that happened in the early 20th century. After reason, after the death of reason, after the death of despair, all the things that came from World War II. And these painters are trying to make light itself through the subject, and they want to convey the immaterial through the material. The magicians. Those that take all the parts and then turn it into something more than just the sum of its parts. And I want to use this illustration here. Thank you, ChatGPT, because I was like, make an illustration. I did, and this helped so much because I had this idea in my head and I didn't know where to find the illustrations to back it up. But when we talk about that traditional painting before, you think about that Christina's world, the girl who's in the field. We can kind of think of those compositions as windows. We're peering out onto a scene. And a lot of those more pictorial storytelling paintings are like windows. When we get to this era of art, and I'm talking about all three of these currents in art, it's really asking you to pass through a door into an unknown. Think about that for a moment. And I literally, I was with Gaetan at the museum the other day, and I was standing in front of that red Ellsworth Kelly, and I was trying to explain to him ideas, and I literally like opened a door and walked through it, putting myself in that headspace of saying like, I am giving myself over to this experience with this piece by passing through this threshold. Thank you, Michael, who's here, who posed for a lot of these photos a few weeks ago. It's really asking for your attention. And so if you picture it that like the artist's intention is built into the canvas, and if we give our attention, then we get the experience. And a lot of these artists would say that the paintings that they make require the viewer to complete them. You walk through that doorway into the threshold, and you are an active participant. The way that you are looking is completing the painting for them. This is a really nice, simple one to start with. This is at the Cantor Center down at Stanford in the Anderson collection. This is Adolf Gottlieb from 1958. It's called Transfiguration 3. This is the sort of thing that people say, my child could do this, and perhaps your child could. But there is a very deeply spiritual feeling in these pieces when you're with them in person. We have this glowing, absorbing, sun-like orb at the top. And we have this frenetic, muscular, gestural splash of paint at the bottom. And that is the story of life. Serenity and conflict are constantly adjacent to each other, in war with each other, and we hope to live somewhere here in the middle. I'm not making this up. This is sort of part of his way of thinking, that these two energies, these two opposing forces that are complements of each other in a way, can be illustrated and felt through a painting. George O'Keeffe, this is late work of George O'Keeffe. Remember, we're with the alchemist now. So she is giving us the infinite. She's giving us the infinite in an intimate way, and she's revealing something about the universal to us through these simple forms. This also came from a plane experience from her. She traveled a lot, and she would observe clouds, and that sense of that constantly, that horizon that's constantly moving away from you, and those clouds that are like footsteps towards eternity. Huge painting. Joan Mitchell. Now this could look a lot like a Pollock, but Joan's style was much more thoughtful in the sense that it wasn't this quick performance. It was something where these layers and these strokes and these gestures and these marks are really being laid down with a lot of conversation happening with the canvas. I lay a color down, a stroke, I step back, I think, what is it asking for now? And the next one, am I liking the way? Is that feeling right for me? I'm trying to think about the trees outside. I'm suddenly thinking about the stream of water near the trees outside. I'm bringing in some blue down here. This is that expressionism in the terms of reacting to your canvas and having a creative conversation with it. I wanted you to see this photo because I wanted you to see like the scale of the pieces, and this is really how you should be able to experience the paintings, either alone or with friends, which is that these canvases are so large that they can completely consume your field of vision. and you can exist inside that threshold with them. Helen Frankenthaler, a disruptor in one sense, because she said, let's thin out the paint so much, put it on the floor, and let's soak it into the canvas, so much so that it's not living on the surface of the canvas, like visible strokes that you can see, but it is becoming part of the weave of the canvas. That's pure art now. It is actually embedded into the fabric of the canvas. And she was pouring her thinned out paints onto the floor to create pieces like this. Emotion and motion, it was about fluid transition, and a big part about control and lack of control, because you cannot control when you pour out the paint like that. You only have a certain amount of control. So it's letting chance and your own will have a dance together. This is someone that came to her studio, Morris Lewis, and said, oh my gosh, epiphany, this is how I want to paint. And I think it's a great example of a painting that the painting is the event. The subject is itself. You do not need to say like, well, if like there's a field of flowers here, or this is a rainbow that has like been refracted through a window prism. Like, no, it's just what you see, and that's pretty fantastic. So these are serene, but very monumental. They feel like forces of nature and like rivers of paint. That's a SF MoMA. Now to sort of like the all-timer, Marc Rothko. If you ask people who their favorite 20th century artist is, most people say Marc Rothko. There's a very good reason for it. He is creating these monuments of meditation, monoliths that almost are like a religious-like experience. This is about a 7-foot painting. And it wasn't just one layer of paint that went on there. This is veils and veils and veils of paint that are built up that creates this sense of vibration and depth in the piece. And people get a great sense of serenity and radiance and a meditative state of mind when they're in front of these paintings. So think about this. This is an artist saying, I'm taking a square canvas, I'm taking 3 basic colors and 2 very basic shapes, a square and a rectangle, and I'm gonna whip this into something that makes some people cry. It can be that simple when it is that well executed, when that feeling, that intent is there. Jules Olitsky, I wanted to say to the Cook family that this is an artist that I think had a great deal to do with Jay Cook. This is one, sorry that it's a little askew there. This is one of Jay Cook's paintings here with the pink horizon, or the pink sky. And the piece at the top middle there is his as well. And you can see that spattering of paint, that playing with light, that is very similar to Jules Olitsky. Agnes Martin. Do we have any Agnes Martin fans in the house? This is order as transcendent meditation. And I put this, it's so hard to see because they're extremely subtle pieces that they demand a lot of attention. But I put this in the context of they're often set up in rooms by themselves like a meditation zone, which is absolutely appropriate for the intention of the artist. A place where you can sit and those subtleties can slowly unravel and reveal themselves to you. Cy Twombly, who was taking the idea of writing and graffiti and symbols and poetry and building it up in the sense that he's creating a language of his own that seems to transcend all the languages that we have to create kind of like a language, vibration, and vernacular of its own. One of our artists here, Lucy Howard Cohen, there's a piece of hers downstairs. She was a Bay Area abstract expressionist. And so I included the Joseph Cook piece there. Here, for me, the alchemy is that he has taken the breaking down of the landscape, reordered those shapes and colors, and given us something that feels like a landscape, but also feels like a memory or a dream. So it has escalated beyond reality to something that has great feeling and nostalgia and dreaminess to it. David Park, one of our Bay Area figurative painters, taking the human form and letting us, through these very only suggestive faces, see our own humanity in them. So transcending the idea of a portrait into figures that stand in for all of us. And I think this is the last one of this before we talk about our four specific artists. And this is Keith Haring. And Keith Haring was a graffiti artist in New York. He was actually there at the same time as Marc Symczak. They both came from Pittsburgh, and they arrived in New York within a couple years of each other. So when we get to Marc, it's a similar environment and vibe that's going on. And he was drawing in the empty spaces in the subway in New York. He was collaborating with young taggers or graffiti artists, like this gentleman, LA2 was his name. And he created a series of repetitive symbols that could speak to a child, to someone that didn't speak English, to an older person, to someone suffering from AIDS, to someone who was caring for an AIDS patient, to someone who was experiencing joy or grief. His language he created, his semiotics, I think is the word, would literally go worldwide within 5 years because it was that flexible. So to me, that's alchemy. Okay, just take a little pause as we go into the second and last stretch and talk about our Masters of Abstraction partially through the lens of this learning that we've been doing tonight. I want to thank and point out, give gratitude and point out the time and the work that our staff have done in stretching these paintings, restoring the frames, building the stretcher bars, photographing them. We've been working on this for months using that downstairs space. And literally as a team, this is all we've been doing for the last 90 days or so. So thank you, team. All right, the first artist we're going to talk about, we didn't know if anyone from his family was going to, or friendship group was going to be here tonight, but Joseph DiStefano. And can I have hands of who knew Joe? Out there, make sure you're inside for this part, or unless you can see. Okay. So Joe was an Emeryville artist. He showed in Berkeley, he showed in Emeryville, he showed in Oakland, especially in the last 30 years prior to his passing in 2020. He had been in New York and other eastern states before that. And these large abstract expressionist paintings that you saw downstairs are his from the early 1970s. He also experimented with shaped canvases, which I think is really cool. And you can see that his palette of these primary colors as being sort of like being primary to the palette. That doesn't make sense. Primary colors were reigning supreme in his palette. This is us discovering the paintings that have been rolled up for decades with in his studio for a part-time and then with his surviving partner, who sadly passed about 6 months ago and is not here tonight. That's her there, Diane. That's him on the right. He really made his living as a sculptor in many ways. He did a lot of public art projects in Oakland and Sacramento. And you can see through his work that he's really thinking about the world in terms of how do all the pieces fit together. He worked in printmaking, sometimes in these really simple styles. Again, these shaped canvases that sort of remind us of Gerhard Richter, and canvases that have this is actually work on paper, sorry, on the far right side. He was an experimental artist. He was working and trying all these different ways of approaching the canvas and the paper. And for each of our artists tonight, I haven't even told our team that I'm doing this. I'm taking speaker's privilege, and I have identified what I consider to be a masterwork for each one of our 4 artists tonight. And if I didn't say this earlier, this whole process has really helped me with my own art practice in terms of being able to really assess what I think is a successful painting or that I'm on the right track, thinking about this process of disruption, order, and alchemy, because I think the best paintings, for me, have gone through all 3 stages of that process. Disruption, through to order, through to alchemy. And we're going to talk about this piece here, which you can see downstairs. So this is an abstract expressionist piece that you'd probably think right away that it looks like a Pollock, but it actually looks more like a Joan Mitchell. This was probably not done on the floor, it was done on the wall. This is more strokes of paint from a brush and not so much from dripping from a can like with Pollock. And I can guarantee you that to have this successful composition that's there, that there was a lot of building and then breaking, looking for the ways that these different gestures and colors were going to come together in an order that was going to be more than just the sum of colors and strokes of paint. And one of the things that I saw through into this piece was, and I want you guys to look for yourselves downstairs, that we're peeking through to this blue that tends to show up. I don't think he painted the whole background blue. I think he painted these large billowy shapes as blue in the background first and soaked it into the canvas and then applied over time all of these layers of paint. And what I see here is sort of like, oh gosh, what was that movie about the theory of everything everywhere all at once? Yeah. This is like an everything everywhere all at once experience, but at the other side, peeking through, if you take the time, is the infinite, the blue representing the infinite. And I see this as a struggle that went through the chaos, the order, and then finally hitting that moment of transcendence. We have so many friends and family of Jay Cook. He didn't go by Joseph or Joe, he went by Jay. Can you all raise your hands if you're with the Cook party of 14? Obviously a very beloved by his nieces and friends and family who were hugely instrumental in recording, saving, conserving, and storing the work and bringing it to us. Thank you. And so Jay was really in LA when modernism, like all of these different currents, were all taking off on the West Coast. So he's very reflective of all of these different impulses as an artist. This is when the 3 nieces came and brought all of the ephemera, the show notices, the personal little notes to himself, the list of, he had an art gallery / framing shop in Bel Air, Brentwood, at a couple other locations. And he had a list of like his celebrity clients, which was pretty impressive. Can you help me remember some of them? Vincent, Gregory Peck, Vincent Price, who was a huge art collector, and then some famous authors.
Miller.
Henry Miller, yeah. This shows you the breadth of his work, how he spent a fair amount of time in the Southwest. You can really see the George O'Keeffe in this. And you could see how he could simplify something like this to this, and this to this, and also worked in a figurative style. So we get this wonderful, surreal, I don't really think it's great to call it a ghost. It's sort of like this essence that is in the painting, and then this wonderful gestural light bulb. I think like we only have 2 elements in that composition. The black is the 3rd element because darkness. I'll let you guys read what you'd like to read into that one. One of that piece we talked about before. And this is the masterwork that I've selected. This is in watercolor. He was a very award-winning watercolorist, actually showed his paintings as well at SF MoMA in the late 1960s. And when we think about breaking down the idea of a figure or a portrait or a form, that's very much here. Riding the line between something that is concrete and present and yet dissolving at the edges. Are we moving into something that has form? Are we moving away from something that has form? Is the spirit or material? The way that he unifies all three of these with the single color of blue. So there's no skin color, there's no eye color. Are they three different aspects of him? He's invoking the idea of the Trinity here, the most stable of all of the different forms, the kind of pyramid of humanity. And I really do love the way this is toggling between this of this world and not of this world moment. And really just in one color plus white. Marc Symczak, and we have Marc's wife, Sue, and daughter, and I'm sorry, remind me? Mary here. All this, Symczak, Nora, who came all the way from New Jersey and New York. And Wisconsin. Oh my gosh, when we opened these paintings, which were brought here by two of Marc's friends, weren't you driving?
On the trip, yeah.
So Sue was driving with her two friends, bringing all the paintings from New Jersey. And then in New Mexico, you had to turn back to take care of a sick pet, right? Sick dog.
My dog got sick.
And then the two others made it all the way. This is them arriving and us bringing in the paintings. And here we are on the phone 5 minutes later with Sue letting her know that everything's here. Marc was a huge lover of jazz, that piece over here on the right. And also an incredible lover of theater. He, when you guys arrived in New York, he eventually was asked to do a set. We actually had two of the people that had one of the theater companies he worked for just happened to be in San Francisco 2 days ago, and we sat down and talked about his art. But at that particular place, it was an art gallery in the front and that you walk through, and then it was a 99-seat theater in the back. And he would sometimes show his art in the front, but the theater became a huge part of his three-dimensional art and his subject matter for his two-dimensional art. He dabbled in surrealism. For me, Marc was always looking for the pattern in everything and where to find the harmony in the pattern. In the city, how all those different disparate parts come together into some sort of in concert with each other. This painting is over here. One of the things I really love about Marc's work is that the environment is always in sympathy and in step with the figures. So there's this sense of there isn't such a separation between the figures and where they're placed. So we're obviously looking at an ocean scene. We have a really unique perspective here. If he was painting from the shore and looking out, we'd be seeing primarily heads bobbing in, right? But because we're above, we get to see all the action and all the different shapes of the bodies, both on the shore where the water's breaking and the water. And there seems to be this incredible sympathy between the ocean and the bodies, and we get that all kind of, that's how it all fits together in Marc's mind. And this is the masterwork that I've chosen for him. What a handsome guy. So I was told by the two theater owners, friends that were here the other day, that Marc would attend every dress rehearsal. and love to watch all of the performers preparing and reading their scripts backstage. And this began to seep into his ideas about what he wanted to paint and the aesthetic. And when we look at this painting here, which I'm sorry, I want to actually place on the easel. Oh, my goodness. I don't want it to be lopsided. We look okay? All right. We have all of these different performers in backstage who are reading their lines and preparing. And it's so cool to see what Marc's doing here, because he's giving us an environment that to me feels like the pages of a script on the floor. All of these different rectangular shapes. We have just the suggestion of the curtain back here to tell us a little bit about more where we're at. We also get this above view, which lets us see the books a little bit more. A tilted table, which kind of takes us out of like real world and a little bit of the dream world. And it was interesting when I was with your friends, he was like, oh, look, they're all wearing the same clothes. They're not all wearing the same clothes. They're all wearing their clothes, but he has unified them by painting all of their clothes in the same color, and they all have the same skin tone. So no matter what their skin color was, no matter what their age is, they all have a very similar kind of appearance in their clothes and in their other aspects of their appearance. And so he's pulling them all together into this troupe, to this harmony, by sort of resisting the detail and sublimating the specificness, and instead creating this sense of an ensemble, working together in an ensemble, even when they're clearly in their separate moments. And so the composition gives us everyone separated, no one's interacting directly with each other, but the sympathy of the colors and all of their red chairs tells us that they are working in ensemble, even in the moment when they are working in their private moment. And I think all of this thinking and the way that he pulls all of these disparate elements together is masterwork. And I can tell that he's gone through this process, probably rearranging and arranging and rearranging, breaking that arrangement down, going through to finally finding the order, and then coming up with these decisions that are going to give us this feeling that these folks that they have a common purpose together, that they are common creatives, they have common fears, anxiety, excitement about all of this, and they're living on the stage, which is kind of an alternative world, right? In Shakespeare, it's sort of like the alternative world.
Wow.
Oh, you guys like it? Well, we have one more artist left. Leigh Hyams, and we have the Hyams family here, and friends from New Mexico and Berkeley and the Bay Area in general. So Leigh lived in San Francisco for over 30 years. She was here during the Bay Area figurative period of David Park, Richard Diebenkorn, Elmer Bischoff, et cetera. And that's, like, for me, that's the zone where she completely just captures me and has made me a fanboy. You saw them downstairs, these incredible figurative pieces. Looking at the cat there at the upper right, I said, you have to go through destruction and order. And yeah, sometimes there are these moments of just epiphany where it just comes out great the first time, but there's a reason why it's called master work. It's generally a lot of work. It's all about problem solving in art with some magic. This was the day that Leigh's son-in-law and granddaughter drove in from New Mexico and delivered the paintings here, and we got to meet in person for the first time. And we're actually meeting Gina for the first time tonight, his wife. Sorry, daughter of the artist. Pardon me. So Leigh lived for a time in North Florida, Sarasota area. Is that North Florida?
No, it's West Coast of Florida.
West Coast Florida, thank you. This is a piece called Turtle Beach. It's a massive canvas. By the way, that piece sold
Oh, wow.
this morning, I believe. Leigh traveled a great deal. She was truly a creative nomad. She worked in Alaska. She explored South America and Brazil, the Celtic countries, and she was someone that was an absorber of cultures and aesthetics and experiences, and it really comes out in her art. But she could also paint a damn good sink. Let me tell you. Which, by the way, is a tradition amongst the Bay Area figuratives. Diebenkorn, Bischoff, gosh, help me, who else? Certainly David Park and Wayne Thiebaud. They all painted the sinks of their, it's a great shape. It's a very biomorphic shape, and then the flowing water, and it's one of my faves. It's actually in the other room there. This is a self-portrait of Leigh at, I calculated it would have been age 47. And I'm just thinking about how daring this piece is. I mean, obviously she's a middle-aged person. She's in a bikini and sarong. We get this direct gaze of the eyes, so she's really working with herself almost like a mirror. Cutting off there, which is giving it such a rupturing the typical representation that we would expect. And one of the things she's doing here that we see a lot in Bay Area figurative painting is that she's using pattern as a foil for the looseness of the abstraction of the skin. They heighten each other. It's like when you put blue and orange next to each other, the two are stronger. When you put pattern and gesture next to each other, the two are stronger. The order and the looseness really enhance each other. And so we see that this wonderful shapes that she's creating there. And then to the right there, her back, that could be a de Kooning painting. That could be a de Kooning abstract right there. And I love it that this is a self-portrait and this idea of just being caught in this moment of looking back. She's orchestrated this moment. And at 47, I think it's very striking. But I have picked this piece as the masterwork, and I did it to make a point. This piece is probably 8 by 12 inches. It's called something like Stone in a Field. I'm sorry that I'm forgetting what it's called, but this is sublime. And she's doing it in such a small number of inches, where she's creating a portal into a magnificent, sublime place. And the way that she's using and suggesting color and staying so abstract and still keeping us in this place and letting us enjoy the abstractness, meaning just the play of color and shapes that exist in nature. And for me, that stone is like a stand-in for the artist, placing herself in the midst of this buzzing beauty of a meadow and the mountains behind. So when we talk about a masterpiece or a masterwork, we've often been seeing, I keep saying, like these grand canvases, and you can see it's often very large canvases. It's not always that way. Sometimes the masterwork is this little piece, a little meditation on a remembered or real moment. We want to say thank you and just say from the bottom of our hearts how much gratitude we have for entrusting the legacy of your family and friends to Lost Art Salon. And we have some bouquets of flowers for each of the families